That's some great Mendelssohn music from the Wedding March. I hope you like it. And this is season 7, episode 14. And I really think we're going to get 2 episodes out of this amazing interview with George Ellis, who's a superstar. I mean, he's an amazing composer and conductor in Sydney, and he's done it globally. He's a great fellow. You're going to enjoy meeting him today, and stay tuned.
Don't know much about history, don't know much biology, don't know much about a science book, don't know much about the French I took, but I do know that I love you, and I know that if you love me too, what a wonderful world this would be. But I do know that I love you, and I know that if you love me too, what a wonderful world this would be.
George Ellis, you are known to many in Sydney and nationally as a musician and more specifically a conductor. You've led orchestras at the Olympics in 2000, at football contests like the NRL Grand Final in Brisbane. You've held that wand high in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, Auckland, New Zealand. You've even conducted a live concert for Queen Elizabeth. When you look back over your career, is there a particular highlight?
That's a very good question. I have two answers to that. It's hard to go past the opening ceremony of the Sydney Olympic Games with the Sydney Symphony Orchestra and a 200-piece choir called the Millennium Choir, and in front of 120,000 people and apparently a few billion watching on TV. That was a particular highlight, a career highlight. I've loved everything I've done, but I do remember telling myself that night as I was standing just outside the dressing room waiting to go onto the stage at the Olympic Stadium in Sydney on the 15th of September 2000, 7:59 p.m. I remember it like it was today. And I remember saying to myself, I was only 36, but I thought I'd had a lifetime of work behind me, which I hadn't. I wasn't even halfway through my career yet. I remember saying to myself, remember this night forever. You've worked to get to somewhere like this that you could only dream of before, and now it was a reality. So I remember saying to myself, remember this night forever. Remember this moment. Remember this feeling, because this is a beautiful thing that's happened to me in my career and in my life. The second answer is not nearly as exotic as that, or as international as that, let's say. And that is, for a few years, about 10 years, I was the director of the children's prom concerts at the Sydney Opera House. And the reason I mention that is even though, I mean, sometimes we only play to 30 or 40 children or, a handful of families, because we would do 3 concerts a day for a week for every season. But sometimes it would only be, as I said, a minimal amount of people in the audience. And it was, even though it was the iconic opera house, it wasn't, in the big concert hall. It was just in one of the little back rooms. And I remember, and I still do children's concerts, but not as much these days, but especially back then, I would often deliberately turn around to the audience and look at the children's faces. Because as a conductor, as you'd know, as everybody would know, Bob, and that is that you've got your back to the audience 99% of the time. The 1% is when you're bowing before and after a piece. The rest of the time, you have until you hear applause, you have no idea what the reaction is, whether there's smiles on faces, whether there's distraction, whether they're, reading their phones or something instead. But with the children, I would turn around, and we're talking sometimes 3, 4-year-olds. I would see this look on their face that's hard to describe in words, but one of alacrity, one of elation, one of surprise, one of joy, one of satisfaction. And that gave me no end. And when I think about career highlights, as you've asked so beautifully, about is that a highlight for me is every time I turn around and we're playing a piece of Mozart, or it could be, a pop song by Dire Straits or the Police, or Fleetwood Mac that I've orchestrated, and I've turned around and I see huge smiles on children's faces, and they're hearing a symphony orchestra for the first time in their life. And that's something very special. And at the end of each rehearsal for a symphony orchestra concert for children, I say to the orchestra, please remember, this is your maybe 1,000th concert, but for the audience, for many of them, it's their very first concert. So play like it's your very first concert.
George, you conduct like it's your first concert with great energy. Some would use the word flamboyant. Who
Uh,
who inspired you in your style of leading orchestras?
Leonard Bernstein.
Hmm.
2 words, Leonard Bernstein. I've seen a lot of footage of, I never saw him conduct live, unfortunately,
Ooh.
but I have seen him on film, on video, on various, lots of footage, a lot. And I just loved the joy on his face when he was conducting a Mahler symphony or a Beethoven symphony. Because we know, especially when we work with great, the greater the musicians they are, the more they can do it on their own. So there isn't much we can do in terms of getting them to play it better. But what we can do, and Leonard Bernstein knew this, or Bernstein, I should say, did it beautifully, was to inspire them to play even better than they thought they might be able to. And to bring the joyous climaxes to a huge climax, to bring the big, the soft lows to a very tender, sweet, beautiful, heart-wrenching low. So the highs and the lows, we can bring those out, and nobody did that better than Leonard Bernstein. And when he did go big and large, you used the word flamboyant. There was nobody more flamboyant than him. So he's not a bad person to try and model yourself on, even though there will never be another one like him.
George, if you had to do it over again,
Yeah,
where would you change things in your life, and what would be the results of that change?
that is a very interesting question because I'm tempted to say, and I think it's true, that I wouldn't change a thing because I've absolutely loved all of it. I will say this, that when I was younger, I was doing more classical music, as in everything from Bach and Mozart through to, especially today's classical composers. And in the 20th century, it got quite hard and very, very difficult to conduct. But as well as loving classical music, I did grow up with pop and rock music. I have an older brother, and he used to love the Beatles, and I loved the Beatles because of that. And then, all the subsequent big acts since then, Elton John, and I mentioned Fleetwood Mac before. And I remember thinking to myself, that would be if that music was orchestrated, that would be so much easier to conduct than a really difficult Shostakovich symphony. And then I thought, if only that could happen one day. And now that's basically what I do all the time. Conduct music by the Beatles orchestrated, or Fleetwood Mac orchestrated, or David Bowie orchestrated, or Queen orchestrated. The short answer is that because I'm now conducting the music that I grew up with a full symphony orchestra, which is a magic combination, I've ended up here. Because of the path I've taken, I wouldn't change a thing. Otherwise, I might not end up here. And I love where I am.
We are a combination, we're an amalgam of all our choices that got us to who we are. You're right.
True.
Right. In
You're
fact, I've
absolutely
only
right.
known you for about 18 months, and
Yes.
we didn't meet at the Sydney Opera House. We met on a pickleball court. And
No.
I appreciate you're a healthy man who likes to keep fit, but pickleball?
Yes.
What were your biggest fears about playing that new sport, and are those fears long gone?
An ex-partner of mine who used to play tennis and grew up being a state tennis champion here in Sydney was playing, took up pickleball. And I would go and see her play. And I always admired her tennis playing. And then I saw her prowess on the pickleball court. And I thought, wow, that sounds wonderful. And so I live that looks wonderful. I live in the inner west of Sydney. And there's a wonderful club, and which is where I met you, Bob, the Sydney Inner West Pickleball Club. And so I signed up and I paid my membership fees, and I took beginner lessons, and I started playing for the beginner sessions. And then we get an email, or it might have been a message in our WhatsApp group saying, Bob Mendelsohn is coming to join you. And we said, Bob Mendelsohn, the person that was instrumental in setting up pickleball in Australia, he's coming to see us? What? And he's coming to play with us? That's incredible. And so it was to my huge delight when you joined us that first morning, as you say, a few months ago now. And I, what I remember about that first morning, and I loved it, was that you did two things. You played with us, and you were, competing with us, and hitting winners, and we were learning from you. But then we just wanted to ask you questions. We would say, so what should we have done at that point? And you would give us magical advice like, pretend your feet are, tied with an elastic band and move up together, and pearls of wisdom and golden pieces of advice that we took on and we still remember, and we still talk about it. We say we won that point because Bob showed us how to do that. I do love everything about pickleball. I love the sport. I love the game as a game and the technique, etc. But I love the friendships that you form. And I also, as you do say, and thank you for saying that, I do like to stay fit. It's important that I stay fit for my job. Only 2 weekends ago, I had 4 concerts in 2 days, 2 on Friday, 2 on the Saturday, a matinee and an evening, and they were 3.5-hour concerts each. And I needed to be fit to get through those. So pickleball really helps me with that. Why not?
Back to music, your musical accomplishments include developing and leading the George Ellis Orchestra. How did that take place?
That's a good question. That took place. My own orchestra happened because event producers, especially after the Sydney Olympic Games, event producers would call me to do an event for them, to do the music for an event. It could be, as you mentioned, the Queen coming out, or it could be a rugby league grand final, as you've mentioned. And they would say, so can we use the Sydney Symphony Orchestra? And I said, well, they're booked till, for the next 18 months to 2 years. When is this event? And they will say it's next month. Oh, well, I'm sorry, we can't get the Sydney Symphony Orchestra or another established orchestra like that within such amount of time. And they would say, well, what can we do? And I said, well, I can put an orchestra together for you. This is, 15 or so years ago. I've got great colleagues who I've studied with at the conservatorium. They're all conservatorium graduates. If you want 80 people, I can get you 80 orchestral musicians and put a symphony orchestra together for you for this particular event. And they would say, fantastic, what's the orchestra called? And I said, it doesn't have a name. It's just a group of musicians. This is at first. And so the producers would say to me, can we just use your name, the orchestra conducted by George Ellis? And that eventually morphed to the George Ellis Orchestra.
We're going to leave it right there. I told you this is a great interview, and we've got so many more things to talk about. What songs play in George's head when he's not conducting, and where was he born and raised, and what gets him up in the morning? He's had so many achievements. He could have stopped a long time ago, but he's still going, and what drives him? And then we'll have the lightning round so we can find out whether he likes Shostakovich or John Williams or Mendelssohn or Bach or Troy Caster Daly or Slim Dusty. It's going to be fun. So stay with us. We'll be back next week with more from George Ellis. Hey, the Bob's Your Uncle podcast has been going for several years. I'm really glad for those of you who listen to us and send in notes. Look, if you have a question or you have a guest you want me to interview, just let me know, would you? Write to me, bobmendo@aol.com. That's the easiest. Or write to me right where you're getting this podcast. That would be good. And by the way, if you want to support the podcast, that's always an easy thing to do. There's a link always in each description, so you can go to Patreon or whatever they're using, whatever they're making me use in these days to support $5-10 a month, something like that. That helps pay for it. But beyond that, look, I just want you to meet people, because people is what this podcast is about. Christine last week from Connecticut. Man, oh man, what great stories. And we've got so many more coming up this summer, this U.S. summer. Sorry, Aussies. I'll be back with you at the end of August, back in Australia, as I continue my snowbird life. It's a great thing. And this is almost July. Almost July. It's a new fiscal year. And it's a great opportunity to be kind to other people, listen to other people. Well, that's today's episode. Look, when things are bleak or uncertain, look up to God. He's in his heaven, and Bob's your uncle. Shalom from Nashville.